In 1963, 20th Century Fox released a film that had nearly destroyed the studio. It had cost more money than any movie ever made. It had been shot on 3 continents, shut down, restarted, recast, and rebuilt from the ground up, and it had 63 acres of the studio's own land sold out from under it to pay the bills. When it finally reached most cinemas, audiences saw a film that ran just over 3 hours. What they did not see was the version its director had actually made, a work of roughly 6 hours conceived and shot as 2 separate films that told the whole story as he intended it. Parts of that version have surfaced over the decades. Most of it never has. More than 60 years later, the missing hours of the most expensive film ever made are still missing, and the story of where they went is stranger than the scandal everyone remembers. Number 1. The production that collapsed twice. Cleopatra had been filmed before as a silent picture in 1917, and again in 1934 with Claudette Colbert. The new version began modestly. In the late 1950s, with Fox in serious financial difficulty, studio president Spyro Skouras approved a Cleopatra budgeted at around $2 million to be shot quickly in England. It was a disaster almost immediately. The English weather was wrong for Egypt. Elizabeth Taylor, cast in the title role, contracted pneumonia and came close to death. Production shut down entirely, with around $7 million spent and almost nothing usable to show for it. When the film restarted, everything had changed. The original director, Rouben Mamoulian, was replaced by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, a writer-director with 4 Academy Awards for All About Eve and A Letter to 3 Wives. The production moved to Rome, to the largest sets ever built for a motion picture, with reported crowds of over 10,000 extras and a wardrobe for Taylor alone said to run to 65 costumes. Mankiewicz wrote the script at night and shot it by day, and the budget that had started at $2 million climbed, in the end, to a reported $44 million. Number 2. The 6-hour version Mankiewicz cut. When Mankiewicz finally delivered his cut, it ran to approximately 5 hours and 20 minutes, and it was never meant to be one film. His intention, from the structure of the shooting to the writing to the editing, had always been 2 separate pictures. The first covering Caesar and Cleopatra, the second covering Antony and Cleopatra. In his view, the story could not be told at feature length without losing exactly the depth that justified the scale. Fox rejected the 2-film structure outright. The studio was fighting for survival and needed one film in cinemas as fast as possible. Mankiewicz's cut was trimmed first to a roadshow version of around 4 hours and 3 minutes, which opened in selected cities in June 1963. Then, for the wide general release across the United States, it was cut again to 3 hours and 12 minutes. The difference between the version Mankiewicz assembled and the version most audiences saw represents, by various estimates, roughly 2 hours of finished, edited footage. Some of it survived in the roadshow cut. Some of it has never been publicly released in any form, in any decade, anywhere. Number 3. What Zanuck did to it. Number 3. Darryl Zanuck, the man who had built 20th Century Fox, returned as president in 1962, in large part because Cleopatra's costs had become an existential crisis for the studio. When Mankiewicz delivered his cut, Zanuck took personal control of the editing. Mankiewicz was removed from his own film. The relationship between the two men collapsed into open hostility, and Mankiewicz sued Fox over the loss of his final cut. A lawsuit eventually settled out of court on confidential terms. But the practical outcome was public and permanent. The version that reached cinemas in June 1963 was not the version Mankiewicz had assembled. Zanuck's position was straightforward. A 6-hour, 2-part epic was not a viable commercial release for a studio on the edge of collapse, and the investment had to be recouped fast. Mankiewicz never accepted that framing. He maintained until his death that the released film was a truncation of a complete and coherent work. Both positions were legitimate. The studio had real financial constraints. The director had real creative ones. The missing hours sit, to this day, in the space between those two arguments. Number 4. The affair and what it actually cost. During production in Rome, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, her Mark Antony, began an affair. Both were married to other people. It became one of the most photographed events in the history of celebrity journalism. The Vatican newspaper published a condemnation. Front pages ran the story for months, and paparazzi laid siege to Cinecittà. Clone channels have built an entire framing on this, the claim that intimate Taylor-Burton scenes were censored and suppressed. That is not what happened. The cuts made to Cleopatra were about runtime and studio survival, not the production code, and no vault of suppressed love scenes is documented anywhere. What the affair actually cost the production was time, money, and control, rescheduled scenes, insurance complications, and a director managing a global scandal from inside it. And it shaped the final film in a quieter way. The scenes where Taylor and Burton's chemistry burned, the scenes audiences would pay for, were the scenes the studio was most likely to keep. The material that went first was the political and expository connective tissue, precisely the material that made Mankiewicz's two-film structure coherent. The scandal, in other words, helped decide which hours went missing. Number 5. The scenes cut for the wide release. The roadshow version, the 4-hour cut that opened in selected cities, contained sequences that vanished when the film went wide at 3 hours and 12 minutes. Among the material known to have been trimmed for the general release, extended sequences in Alexandria developing Cleopatra's early relationship with Caesar, scenes building the political context in Rome, and additional material between Antony and Cleopatra in Egypt that carried the emotional logic of the film's second half. Critics who saw both versions noticed the difference and said so in print. The shorter cut, they wrote, felt truncated in its back half. Antony's deterioration and Cleopatra's final decisions arrived too quickly to carry the weight the story needed. This is worth sitting with, because it is the rare case where the missing frame's effect is visible in the historical record. Two versions of the same film reviewed side by side in the same summer, with the shorter one judged to make less sense. The wide release cut was not a different creative vision. It was the same film with its connective tissue removed, and audiences in 1963 could feel the absence without knowing what exactly they were missing. Number 6. The footage nobody has ever seen. Beyond the roadshow cut lies the deeper layer. Footage that has never appeared in any released version at all. Mankiewicz's assembly of the two-film structure contained scenes that did not survive even into the 4-hour roadshow print, and the specific content of that unreleased material is not comprehensively documented in that. The public record, which is itself revealing about how thoroughly the two-film version was dismantled. What is known from production records and later interviews, scenes were shot developing the political dynamics in Rome after Caesar's assassination. Additional material covered Cleopatra's position in Egypt between Caesar's death and her alliance with Antony, and there are reported sequences expanding the final act, Antony's collapse. Cleopatra's last days cut because no release could accommodate them. Mankiewicz, in interviews late in his life, described the lost material with precision rather than self-pity. He never claimed the missing footage would have made the film a masterpiece. He was too exact a craftsman for that. What he said was narrower and harder to dismiss. The story, as he had structured it, required its full length to make sense. Without it, motivations arrived unearned, and consequences landed without weight. Number 7. The budget that nearly ended Fox. By the time Cleopatra reached post-production, 20th Century Fox had sold 63 acres of its own Beverly Hills backlot to Stay Alive land that became Century City, the office district that stands there today. The reported $44 million cost was not simple extravagance. It was the accumulated weight of a production that had started, stopped, restarted, expanded, and run for years across 2 continents. Cleopatra opened in New York on June 12, 1963, and the strange truth is that it was not a flop in the way legend remembers. By most accounts, it was the highest-grossing film released that year, but a $44 million film earning well could still not recoup fast enough to rescue Fox's immediate finances. The studio survived barely and took years to recover. Within months, it had bet its future on a very different production, a modestly budgeted musical about a singing governess in Salzburg. And the financial catastrophe is the direct, mundane reason the 6-hour Cleopatra does not exist in public form. There was never a commercial moment when reassembling it made sense. The missing footage stayed wherever it was, because no one could afford to care. Number 8. The night Taylor saw the film. Elizabeth Taylor was the first performer in history reported to be paid $1 million for a single film, a figure that, with overages from the endless schedule, reportedly grew several times larger. What she thought of the finished picture is less famous and more telling. By her own widely quoted account, when Taylor finally watched the released version, the experience made her physically ill. She reportedly found that the performance she had given had been cut to fragments, the connective scenes gone, the character's logic broken by the missing hours. Whether every detail of that story is literally true, her verdict on the film was no secret. She spoke of it with distaste for the rest of her life. The industry's verdict was more divided. Cleopatra was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and won 4 for its cinematography, art direction, costumes, and visual effects. Rex Harrison was nominated for his Caesar. The craft, in other words, was honored. The storytelling was not. Even the film's awards read like a description of the problem. Everything you could see in a single frame was magnificent, and everything that had to build across hours had been cut away. Number 9. The restoration that have happened. Here, the record needs correcting, because older coverage and plenty of internet videos still claims the roadshow version is lost. It is not. For decades, the version in circulation was the shorter general release cut, and the 4-hour roadshow print was genuinely hard to see. But the roadshow-length version returned on home video in restored form, most notably in the restoration prepared around the film's 50th anniversary in 2013, running around 4 hours, and that is the version available today. This matters for honesty, and it matters for the story, because it sharpens what is actually missing. The restored 4-hour Cleopatra is Fox's roadshow cut, the version Zanuck signed off. It is not Mankiewicz's film. The two-film structure. The assembly reported at roughly 5 hours and 20 minutes. The scenes that never survived into any release print, none of that has ever been restored, released, or publicly shown. So the honest status of Cleopatra today is a film in 3 layers. The version everyone saw, the version that has been recovered, and the version that remains missing. This channel exists for the 3rd layer. But you should know the second one exists because a story that pretends otherwise is the kind of story we correct. Number 10. The search for the missing hours. The obvious question is where the missing material went, and the honest answer is that nobody publicly knows. Film elements from the production are held in the Fox Library, now part of Disney, and in various archives. Around the 50th anniversary, it was reported that archivists went looking, a search of vaults and holdings for the trims and unreleased sequences, with the hope reported at the time of reconstructing something closer to Mankiewicz's longer version. What that search found has never been fully detailed in public, but no extended reconstruction ever appeared, which tells its own quiet story. Whatever survives, it was evidently not enough or not in usable condition to rebuild the film. Whether Mankiewicz's assembly still exists as a viewable element is simply not a matter of public record. And this is where the channel's honesty rule matters most. We do not know, the studio has not said, and anyone online claiming certainty in either direction is guessing. What can be said is this: unlike King Kong's spider pit, thrown away in an era when cut film was worthless, Cleopatra's missing hours vanished inside a functioning studio archive system. Which means the door, however unlikely, has never been formally closed. Number 11. Why the full version may never exist. Why has no one ever rebuilt Cleopatra? The answer comes down to 3 unglamorous things: rights, cost, and commercial logic. The film now belongs to Disney through its acquisition of the Fox Library. A reconstruction worthy of the 2-film concept would mean locating and assessing every surviving element, restoration work on a massive scale, and a release strategy for a 6-hour, 60-year-old historical epic, a project whose audience, even generously counted, is a niche. Disney restores and re-releases catalog titles when the commercial case is there. A 1963 roadshow epic with no franchise value does not fit that matrix, however significant its history. And there is a harder constraint underneath the commercial one. A reconstruction is only possible if the material survives in usable form, and as we have seen, that has never been publicly confirmed. Mankiewicz died in 1993, having spent 30 years declining to pretend the released film was his. What remains for audiences is the 4-hour roadshow cut impressive, flawed, and honest about neither its missing connective tissue nor the two-film shape it was carved from. The full version he intended has never been seen. More than 60 years on, it may simply never exist to be found. Cleopatra cost more to make than any film before it. It was shot across continents over the better part of 3 years. It consumed 63 acres of its own studio, and it nearly ended one of the oldest companies in Hollywood. And the version its director actually made the two films? The full structure, the story, as he built it, has never been seen by anyone outside of Fox editing suite in 1962. That is what the missing frame sometimes is. Not burned like the magnificent Amberson's negatives, not thrown away like the Spider Pit, not censored like the pre-Code Kong, just dismantled, carved into release lengths by a studio fighting for its life and then left, unassembled, behind rights and cost and commercial logic, while the world watched a different film and called it Cleopatra. The scandal everyone remembers was never the secret. The affair played out on every front page in the world. The real hidden story was quieter. A director removed from his own cut. A star who by her own account could not bear to watch what remained. An archive that may or may not still hold the pieces, and a studio that survived by selling the ground the film stood on. The 4-hour version has come back. The rest has not, and after 60 years, it probably never will. If this is the kind of film history you want more of, the lost cuts, the withheld versions, the endings and hours audiences never saw, subscribe to The Missing Frame. There is always another frame missing.